Hi, welcome back to the True Crime Dish. Today we are going to be discussing the very mysterious and bizarre case of Elisa Lam, and we're also going to make a French toast casserole. If you know anything about this case, you know how truly wild it is. Even after researching it, I still am like, what the fuck happened to Elisa Lam? Like, when I get to the afterlife, I am first of all going to find my dog, and then secondly, I am going to say, what the hell happened to Elisa Lam? On January 28th, 2013, 21-year-old Elisa Lam checks into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Elisa was on what she called her West Coast tour. It was basically a travel plan for her to travel to various destinations along the west coast of the United States. But when Elisa checked into the Cecil on that day in January 2013, she had no idea that this hotel would become her final destination. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old college student from Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada. Her family had immigrated from Hong Kong before she was born, and it was in Vancouver that her family opened up their own restaurant. Elisa had a sister named Sarah. It was said that the two were very close. They shared a strong mutual love for fashion and clothes. In 2010, Elisa took to blogging, and that's where she would share her love of fashion, accounts of her life, and she even shared some of her own struggles with mental illness on her blog page. She had been diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder and was being treated with several different medications. And I honestly think it's pretty admirable that she was going online and sharing her own struggles with mental illness, because 13 years ago in 2010, I feel like it was still pretty taboo to talk about mental illness. And even now, today in 2023, there's still quite a stigma around it. So I think it's pretty cool that she was going online and, kind of trying to help normalize mental illness. And her blogs give us so much insight into who Elisa really was and what she was going through at the time. And her blog posts are actually still up to this day. Like, I created my own Tumblr account so that way I could see her blog posts. I'm glad that we have them, but it's always a little eerie to me looking at someone's social media accounts after they've passed away for some reason. In 2012, she made a blog post about suffering a relapse in her mental health journey, and her relapse ended up causing her to drop quite a few of her college classes. She wrote on her blog about feeling, quote, utterly directionless and lost. She had dreams of continuing school into grad school, and so she was worried what dropping all of these classes would look like on her resume. I think because of all these overwhelming feelings, Elisa decided to take advantage of the time off of school and kind of use that time to discover herself. And thus, she put together her West Coast tour. It was a plan for her to travel all by herself along the west coast of the United States. Her parents were not thrilled by this idea, given the past year that Elisa had had, but reluctantly they agreed on the contingency that Elisa would check in with them every single day to let them know that she was safe. And with that, Elisa headed down to the West Coast. She started out in San Diego, where she would spend a few days before arriving in LA on January 28th, 2013, where she would check into the infamous Cecil Hotel. Now, I want to discuss the Cecil Hotel for a moment, just to kind of set up the scene. It was located near Skid Row in downtown LA, and if you don't know what Skid Row is, it's basically an area where the homeless community tends to stay or congregate. There's sex workers, there's drugs. Overall, really not a safe area, especially for a tourist, but it was cheap, so Elisa booked it anyways. She was also not keen to the very dark history that the Cecil had. The Cecil she had seen some things. She had some secrets. That's why her hair was so big. It's so full of secrets. That's the Cecil. It was home to suicides, unsolved murders. Even serial killers had stayed there. You might know a man named Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. He had stayed there at some point during his murderous stint. And also Jack Unterweger. He's Austrian. I'm not, but he was an Austrian serial killer who also stayed there at some point. Allegedly, he stayed there because Richard Ramirez had stayed there. I guess he looked up to Richard Ramirez. that's not a good idol. Richard Ramirez is horrible, and he also had halitosis. So anyways, both of those murderers had stayed there at some point. Just to give you an idea of the type of crowd this hotel draws in, there was definitely some kind of dark energy looming at the Cecil. Like, it was undeniable. Also, just a fun fact, the Cecil Hotel was actually the inspiration behind American Horror Story Hotel. It makes a lot of sense. Upon checking in, Elisa was actually renting a hostel style room, so it was a shared room, but she wouldn't be in there long because her roommates pretty quickly started to make complaints about Elisa and her odd behavior. The manager of the hotel said Elisa was leaving notes for her roommates that said things like, go home or go away. And she said that Elisa would also lock the door to the room and then require a password when the roommates were trying to get back in, even though like they were clearly like paying and renting the room as well. So I think already we can kind of see a little bit of a pattern of paranoia. Elisa took the time to explore downtown LA a bit. She visited some local shops, including a bookstore that was literally called The Last Bookstore, which is just very eerie knowing what happens. There's a lot of little details about this case that just make it so eerie. But the manager of the bookstore recalled Elisa being very lively and friendly. Elisa had even showed the manager some of the gifts that she had gotten for her family back home. And the entire trip, Elisa stuck to her promise and called her parents every single day to let them know that she was safe. That is until January 31st. And on this day, Elisa's parents did not hear a single word from her all day. She was supposed to be checking out of the Cecil on January 31st and heading out to Santa Cruz, but she never checked out of the hotel. And when her parents didn't hear from her, they panicked immediately. They wasted no time. They contacted the LAPD and reported Elisa missing, and they hopped on a flight to California. The police jumped into action and searched the entire hotel with canines, as well as spoke to anyone that could have seen Elisa in the days prior to her disappearance. But they didn't have much luck gaining any important information in regards to her whereabouts. Police did, however, get their hands on some very interesting elevator footage from the last day that Elisa was known to be at the hotel. If you know this case, then you have likely seen this video and you know how creepy and strange it is. I'll link the video down below. If you have time, I would pause this and go watch that video, because you just have to see it to really understand how weird it is. And it also definitely comes into play later, but it's basically, you know, elevator surveillance footage of Elisa in the elevator. And she's very on edge, I would say. She keeps kind of like popping out of the elevator and like looking around really frantically, and then she'll like hurry back in the elevator and kind of like hide in the corner. At one point she just presses a bunch of buttons in the elevator and she's just acting very erratic and like fidgety. She just looks obviously very uncomfortable and kind of paranoid, but it's weird because we don't see anyone else in this footage. No one's in the elevator with her. If someone's in the hallway, they're out of frame and we don't see them. But she just keeps like looking around to see who's around, and then she'll jump back in the elevator and she'll hide, and she just keeps doing that, but we never see anyone. It's very chilling. The police released this video to the public in hopes to get a little more information, but really they just end up with more questions. This video goes viral and the internet is just swarming with theories about what happened. A lot of people pointed out that the elevator doors never closed. Even when she pressed all of those buttons, it never closed. And you know how fast elevator doors close. Like, they will cut a off, but they literally never closed the entire video, so it's super weird. Some people also pointed out that there could have been somebody following her and they just weren't in the frame of the video. So there were a lot of thoughts on this footage, but like I said, it did not give police any more answers. So roughly 3 weeks go by with no movement in the case. Elisa's belongings were found in her room, but her phone was never recovered. She did make a blog post before she went missing about losing a phone at a speakeasy that she had been to, so that could possibly explain why her phone was never found, but again, we're not sure. In those 3 weeks, hotel staff was getting more and more complaints from guests about the water pressure. Some guests were complaining that it just wasn't good. Some were complaining that it smelled weird and tasted weird, and it had like a dark murkiness to it. But with so many guests complaining, hotel worker Santiago Lopez heads up to the rooftop to check out the water tanks and see what's going on. I'm sure he just expected to find like low water levels in one of the tanks or something. But instead, when he peered through the open hatch on one of the tanks, he was absolutely shocked to find a dead and decomposing body floating in the water. This was discovered to be the body of missing Elisa Lam. This means that guests were showering, brushing their teeth, possibly even drinking water that had been contaminated by a decomposing body. An autopsy was performed, but because Elisa was in the water for nearly 3 weeks, I believe it was actually 20 days, she was reported missing on January 31st and they found her body on February 19th. So nearly 3 weeks she was in the water. And unfortunately, she was pretty badly decomposed, as evident by the water. So the medical examiner really didn't have a lot to go off of, but they did note on the report that there were no obvious signs of foul play. So like no blunt force, no scratches, nothing like that. But like I said, they didn't have a ton to go off of in the first place. So an investigation was launched because obviously these circumstances are very strange to say the least. And at first law enforcement was thinking that foul play could have been involved because the rooftop was supposed to be inaccessible to guests. Like only staff had access to it. There was a locked door and an alarm that would be triggered if someone was trying to get up there without, you know, the door code or the key, whatever. So the alarm would have gone off if someone was trying to get up there unless you had a key or a code, such as the hotel staff, but I don't know. There were also 3 fire escapes that led up to the rooftop, and initially when police had searched the hotel right when Elisa went missing and they had the canines, the dogs actually did hit on Elisa's scent on one of the fire escapes. So some people believe that she could have climbed the fire escape up to the roof, but I would think that the fire escapes would also be inaccessible to guests. Like that just seems very dangerous. The police also did not search the water tanks when they initially were looking for Elisa. I mean, the tanks were like 8 to 10 feet high. There was a ladder that led up to the top of the water tanks, but I guess, I don't know, they were just thinking that there was no way anyone could have gotten up there. I really don't know what they were thinking. I feel like that's a pretty good place to look for a missing person, but I'm not the LAPD. When they did find Elisa though, they ended up having to cut a hole in the side of the water tank because the hatch at the top of the water tank really wasn't that big. And I mean, it probably wasn't safe for anyone to really be swimming around in that water. And there are some inconsistencies about how Elisa was found in regards to her clothing. So some sources say that she was found naked with her clothes floating in the water with her. And then other sources say that she was found wearing the clothes that she was seen in the elevator footage wearing. The official autopsy report states that she was found naked. So that's what I'm going with, but just FYI, in case you look into this case, you'll probably see differing statements on that. In addition to this, there's also a lot of inconsistencies about whether the hatch to the water tank was open or closed when Santiago found Elisa. I don't know about you, but I feel like these are both vital details to the investigation. I would venture out to say that if the hatch was closed, homegirl did not put herself in that water tank. I mean, there's just no way she could have. She was pretty petite. She was 5'4", like 120 pounds. And like I said, these water tanks were 8 to 10 feet tall. So I just can't see any world in which she's, you know, floating in the water and she's able to reach up and put a heavy metal lid back on the tank. That just makes zero sense to me. But if the hatch was open, and Santiago, the hotel worker, he reported in court documents that it was open when he found her. I've seen in some sources that he changed his story, not pointing any fingers at all. I've just seen different information in different sources. Some say that initially he was saying that the hatch was closed and then he told the police that it was open, vice versa. So we really don't know, but he did testify in court that it was open. So I think we can go with that. It says that he goes up to the rooftop, peers through the open hatch on the water tank, and sees a dead body floating face up about 12 inches from the top of the water tank. And this little bit was very interesting to me because typically drowning victims are found face down. Like, I literally found an article that says standard drowning position is face down. So it's very strange that she was found face up if they're presuming that she drowned. I'm not saying that it's impossible to have drowned and be lying face up, but typically they are face down. The autopsy came back and the medical examiner ruled Elisa's death as an accidental drowning with her bipolar disorder listed as a contributing factor. The autopsy did state that her lungs were filled with a brown fluid, which would be consistent if she drowned. When they performed the toxicology on Elisa, they discovered that she had been taking her antidepressants, but she had not been taking her medication for her bipolar disorder. And skipping or halting these medications altogether can be extremely dangerous. Side effects can include delusions, hallucinations, paranoia, among many other things. A forensic psychotherapist named Michael Drain took a look at Elisa's case, and he says that if you suffer from bipolar disorder, then stressors or stopping your medication can result in you being in a psychotic state. He believes that Elisa was suffering from a psychotic state. He explains that in the elevator footage, in his professional opinion, Elisa doesn't look like she's in fight or flight mode, meaning she doesn't really seem like she's like running from anyone or, fighting for her life. Instead, she's just acting pretty erratic and paranoid. He says to him it looks more like she's suffering from paranoid ideation. So it seems like the theory from law enforcement and other professionals in the field was that Elisa stopped taking her medication, and that resulted in her being in a psychotic state. They believe that she was likely hallucinating. So it's possible that, she thought she was being chased, or she thought someone was after her, and she runs up to the rooftop to escape, climbs in the water tower to maybe hide. Either didn't realize that it was a water tower when she was climbing in because she's in this hallucinogenic state, or she just didn't realize that there was no way out of the water tank. I feel like I should also mention that in her toxicology report, they did not find any other drugs in her system aside from her antidepressants. When you're in that psychotic state, obviously things are not what they appear to be. So it's very possible that, she climbed into the water tank to hide and then didn't have a way out of the water tank. There are many different theories out there about what happened to Elisa. Some are very far-fetched and some not so much. I think the most prevailing and logical theories are that it was accidental or that she was murdered. Most people that subscribe to the murder theory believe that she was likely murdered by one of the hotel staff members because of the alarm and the lock to the roof. Like, she would not have had access to that hypothetically. And some people have pointed out that the elevator footage appears to be edited. If you look at the timestamps, there's like parts of it that are missing, so it appears to be edited, or like some parts completely erased. Could someone that have worked there been on the footage and then had access to erase the parts of the footage that they were in? We don't know. Also, even after her death, Elisa's blog continued to update. Blog posts continued to be made for like months. Like I said, I literally made a Tumblr account specifically so I could look at her blog, and her blog updated all the way up until June of 2013. So for 5 months, it continued to update. So some people believe that if she was murdered, her killer had her phone and continued to update her blog to make it look like she was alive and well. But I feel like this could be fairly easily disputed because Elisa had made a blog post about losing her phone at the speakeasy. And also, if the killer or whoever wanted to make it look like she was alive and well, why would they not just text her family members? And it also came to light that there was actually a feature on Tumblr that allowed users to schedule posts in advance. So it's very possible that she just had like posts queued up and she already had them scheduled to go live. I feel like that's a pretty logical explanation because she was very into her blog. So to me, it makes sense that she had posts already scheduled. Also, if she was murdered, I just feel like it would be very hard to carry a lifeless body up the tiny ladder to the top of the water tank and then shove a dead body in the hatch opening. Specifically, carrying a dead body up a ladder seems very challenging to me. Not impossible, but it just seems unlikely. So that really didn't make a lot of sense to me either, but literally nothing about this case makes sense. And then there are some people that believe that Elisa took her own life Like we talked about earlier, she was going through a tough time with her mental health, and she seemed to be in a pretty dark place at times. Some of her quotes from her blog say things like, "I wish I could put my brain in a taped shut box and shove it in the back of my closet for a night." That's a pretty dark thought, and I think that just gives us a lot of insight into the struggle that she was having with her thoughts. But personally, I don't think she took her own life on purpose. I mean, she had plans for the remainder of her trip, and she had also bought gifts for her family back home. So to me, she had intentions of leaving the Cecil Hotel. And there's the added fact that she was found naked. If she completed suicide or accidentally drowned, then like, why take off your clothes? That little detail would make more sense to me if she was murdered. And you're probably wondering if there was any evidence of sexual assault, but there wasn't. Autopsy report says there was no damage to any remaining tissue, but beyond that, there's not really a way for us to tell because she was in the water for 3 weeks. Like anything else would have been washed away. There's one particular theory that Elisa was playing the elevator game, and I don't give any credence to this theory, but it is super fucking creepy. Like, I get chills every time I read it, and like, I'm scared, but I'm a big weenie, so it doesn't take much for me. There's a lot of different stories on Reddit about people that have supposedly played the elevator game. If you just Google like Elisa Lam elevator game or elevator game Reddit, you'll find tons and tons of stories about it. I don't think that any of them apply to Elisa, but they are interesting to read about because they're so creepy. Of course, this case is so intriguing and there's so much to speculate, but I think sometimes we can get lost in the theorizing and forget that this was a young girl who lost her life. Someone that was just trying to find her path in life and got lost. Elisa may have been struggling, but she was not giving up. She definitely wanted more out of life. And I think the worst part is her family will likely never have answers, but I hope they've been able to find peace in whatever they believe happened to their daughter. And that is it, you guys. That is the very, very bizarre case of Elisa Lam. Like I said, I still don't know. Like, so much does not add up, but I tend to lean more towards the accidental drowning theory. I mean, that makes the most sense to me given the fact that she had stopped taking her bipolar medication and the side effects that that carries. But I'm not like 100% on any theory. So definitely let me know what you think happened. That's going to be it for this week's True Crime Dish. I will see you all very soon in a new one. Bye, guys.